She was a Flakhelferin, a helper in an anti-aircraft battery. She was a soldier. She had worn the uniform, calculated the trajectories, and felt the thunder of the 88-millimeter guns shake her very bones as they tore at the sky. She had seen planes blossom into fireballs, and she had seen her friends fall. She was 22 years old, and she was a prisoner of war. The other women in the car were a mix of signals operators, nurses, and administrative clerks. They were all that was left of their unit, captured in the final desperate collapse of the front. Beside her, Greta, who was only 17, shivered. Not from cold. The air in the train was thick and humid, but from terror. On her other side sat Ilsa, a signals operator from Berlin, whose face was a mask of hard, cynical anger. "Where are they taking us?" Greta whispered for the 10th time that day. Her voice was thin as thread. "It does not matter," Ilsa said, her voice low and rough. "It is all America. It is all the enemy's land. One place is the same as the next." Annalise said nothing. She watched the sliver of light under the sealed door. It had been day, then night, then day again. She focused on her breathing. She would not show weakness. Not to her comrades, and certainly not to their captors. The train finally squealed, a long, agonizing sound of metal grinding on metal. It jolted, slowed, and then stopped. There was a heavy clang as the bar on the outside of the door was lifted. The door slid open, and the light that flooded the car was blinding. It was not the soft gray light of her Bavarian home. It was a harsh, white-hot glare that seemed to bleach the world of color. "All right, ladies, out! Welcome to Texas." The voice was loud, cheerful, and full of a confidence Annalise found infuriating. One by one, they stumbled out onto a dusty platform. Annalise was last. She stood blinking, letting her eyes adjust. The world was flat. Utterly, impossibly flat in every direction, stretching to a pale blue horizon that seemed 1,000 miles away. The sky was an enormous empty bowl. A dry, hot wind picked up dust and threw it against her face. In the distance, rows of simple black tar paper barracks sat behind high fences topped with barbed wire. A group of American soldiers waited for them. They were different from the combat troops who had captured them. These soldiers were clean, their uniforms pressed. They looked bored. One of them, a corporal with a lazy smile and cold eyes, chewed on a matchstick. He looked the women up and down, his gaze lingering. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said to his friend. Hitler's fan club. His friend, a young private, looked uncomfortable. "Just process 'em, Evans." Corporal Evans spat the matchstick into the dust. He walked over to Annalise, who stood tallest. She met his gaze. "You speak English, Fräulein?" "I speak some, yes," Annalise said. Her voice was clear, her English precise. Evans's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Good. Then you can tell your little friends the rules. Rule number 1, I am in charge of you. Rule number 2, don't cause trouble." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Rule number 3, you're not soldiers. You're just the help, understand?" Annalise felt a cold knot of anger tighten in her stomach. He was mocking her uniform, her sacrifice. She wanted to tell him she had seen more combat than he likely ever had, sitting here in this dusty wasteland. But she held her tongue. She gave a single sharp nod. "Good girl," he sneered. He turned away. "All right, get 'em to processing, delousing new clothes. I want 'em ready by supper." The processing was a humiliation. They were stripped of their uniforms. Annalise folded hers with methodical care, her last link to who she was. They were dusted with a harsh white powder that stung their skin, examined like livestock, and then handed rough, dark blue cotton dresses. They were no longer soldiers. They were just female prisoners. They were marched to a barracks at the very edge of the compound. It was stark but clean. 20 metal cots lined the walls. As the sun began to set, tinting the enormous sky in shades of orange and purple, a profound sense of dislocation settled over Annalise. She was on the other side of the world, dressed in a servant's clothes at the mercy of men like Corporal Evans. Greta began to cry, silent, hopeless tears. Ilsa sat on her cot, staring at the wall, her face like stone. Annalise walked to the small, grime-caked window. She looked out at the endless fence. "We will survive this," Annalise said, her voice filling the quiet room. Ilse snorted. Survive? Look at us. We are nothing. No, Annalise said, turning. Her eyes were clear. We are German women. We will keep our discipline. We will keep our dignity. We will not let them break us. That is how we survive. She moved through the barracks, assigning bunks, creating a cleaning rota. She was recreating order in the middle of chaos. The other women, desperate for any kind of structure, obeyed without question. They were a unit again, however small. Annalise was their leader. They were given a thin, watery stew for supper, which they ate in their barracks. Exhaustion finally claimed them. They fell into a deep, uneasy sleep. The silence of the Texas plains a strange and unsettling backdrop. Annalise woke first. It was not a sound that woke her, but a smell. It was a rich, smoky, salty aroma that filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls. It was a smell from a life long past. She sat up confused. She knew that smell, but it was impossible. A guard banged on their door. On your feet! Breakfast mess in 5. They filed out into the cool, gray morning. The smell was stronger now, hanging heavy in the air. It was bacon, frying bacon. Corporal Evans was waiting, leaning against a post. Morning, sunshine. Hope you're hungry. He marched them not to a soup line, but to a large mess hall. Inside, American guards and staff were already eating, talking loudly, laughing. The German women were directed to a separate line. Annalise stared at the food being ladled onto their metal trays. It was not watery oats or stale bread. It was a mountain of pale yellow scrambled eggs. It was thick slices of white toast with pats of yellow butter. And it was 3 strips of crisp, sizzling bacon. Greta, in front of her, gasped. She took her tray as if in a daze. Annalise stepped forward. The cook, a large man with a white apron, dumped the food on her tray without looking at her. Annalise looked down at the plate. It was more rich food than she had seen in a year. In Germany, there was nothing. Bread was cut with sawdust. Meat was a memory. Coffee was made from roasted acorns. Here, the enemy was serving this feast, to its prisoners. She sat down at the wooden table. Greta was staring at the bacon, tears welling in her eyes. It's a trick, Ilse whispered, her face pale. It must be poisoned. It is not poisoned, Annalise said quietly. She looked over at the American tables. They were eating the same food, but with a casualness that was almost violent. Some of them left half their eggs, stubbed out cigarettes in their leftover toast. This was the true shock. It was not cruelty. It was abundance. It was waste. All the propaganda, all the speeches about the decadent, starving enemy. It was all a lie. This was the enemy. An enemy that had so much they could feed their prisoners bacon for breakfast. Annalise felt a sudden, cold wave of despair, deeper than any she had felt on the train. They had never stood a chance. The war was not just lost. It was a foregone conclusion. This breakfast was more powerful than a tank division. Eat, Annalise ordered, her voice harder than she intended. Greta looked up, startled. I can't. You will, Annalise said. She picked up her fork. Her hands were steady. They are not feeding us out of kindness. This is how they show their power. We will show them our power. We will eat their food. We will grow strong. We will survive their generosity just as we survived their bombs. We will take everything they give us, and we will turn it into strength. Now, eat. She lifted the fork to her mouth and took a bite of the eggs. They were rich and warm. She then picked up a piece of bacon. It was crisp, salty, and sinfully delicious. She chewed slowly, methodically, refusing to show pleasure, refusing to show despair. She was Annalise Brandt, and she would not be broken by cruelty or by kindness. She would endure. Around her, slowly, the other women began to eat. Annalise and her small group of women were assigned to the camp laundry. It was a steaming, concrete-floored building filled with enormous churning washing machines and heavy steam presses. Their job was to wash, dry, and fold the uniforms of the American Guards and the clothing of the thousands of male German POWs housed in a separate, much larger compound across the camp. The work was brutal. The air was thick with the smell of soap and bleach, so hot and humid it was hard to breathe. The women's hands quickly became red and raw, but Annalise insisted on the same discipline she had in the barracks. We will be the most efficient laundry unit in this camp, she told them, her voice cutting through the hiss of the steam. Ilsa scoffed, wringing out a heavy denim shirt. Efficient for them? Let them wash their own filthy clothes. We do this for us, Ilsa, Annalise said, her movements precise as she folded a pair of trousers. They think we are weak. They think we are just women. We will show them how Flakhelferinnen work. We will show them our strength. Her leadership, her unbending will, kept the small group from fracturing. Greta, the young one, slowly regained some color in her cheeks. The regular food and the hard physical labor were making her stronger. Ilsa's bitter comments continued, but she worked as hard as anyone, channeling her rage into the rhythm of the work. Corporal Evans, however, remained a constant, poisonous presence. He was in charge of their work detail, and he seemed to take a special cruel pleasure in tormenting Annalise. He would walk through the laundry, his boots echoing on the wet floor, specifically to find fault with her. "Look at that, Brant," he'd say, pulling a freshly folded shirt from her pile and shaking it out. "You call this folded? My grandmother folds better than this, and she's half blind." Annalise would simply take the shirt from him, refold it perfectly, and place it back on the stack without a word. Her silence, her refusal to be provoked, infuriated him. "Too good to talk to me, is that it?" he'd sneer. "Still think you're some kind of soldier? You're just a glorified washerwoman, a kraut washerwoman." One afternoon, he found a new way to be cruel. It was mail call. Letters from home were rare, heavily censored, and precious beyond measure. Greta had been waiting for weeks, desperate for word from her family in Dresden. Evans sauntered into the laundry, waving a small stack of envelopes. "Mail's in, ladies." Greta's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with hope. Is there one for me? Greta Schmidt?" Evans shuffled through the letters, his lazy smile firmly in place. Schmidt. Ah, yes. Here we are." He held up a thin, pale envelope. Greta burst into tears of relief and joy. "Oh, danke." "Thank you." She reached for it. Evans held it just out of her grasp. Ah. What's the magic word?" Greta froze, confused. Please, Corporal." Evans looked at the envelope, then at the cement floor, still damp from the machines. He looked back at Greta's desperate, pleading face, and then he let the letter drop. It landed with a soft slap in a muddy puddle. "Oops," he said, his smile widening. "Clumsy me." Greta let out a small, strangled cry and dropped to her knees, snatching the letter. But it was too late. The envelope was soaked, the ink running. The letter inside was ruined, a blue-black smear of meaningless pulp. Greta's cry turned into a raw, heartbreaking sob. She clutched the ruined paper to her chest. Something inside Annalise snapped. The heat, the exhaustion, the constant humiliation. It all coalesced into a single point of cold, clear rage. She turned from her folding table and walked directly to Corporal Evans. She stood less than a foot from him. She was tall for a woman, but he was taller. He looked down at her, his expression one of pure, arrogant amusement. "Got something to say, Brant?" "You are a coward," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so cold, so sharp, it cut through the din of the laundry. Every woman stopped working. Evans's smile vanished. "What did you call me?" "A coward," Annalise repeated, meeting his gaze without flinching. "To fight a man, that takes strength. To bully a child," she nodded toward the weeping Greta, "that is the mark of a small, weak man. You are not a soldier. You are a disgrace to your uniform." The air in the room was electric. Evans's face turned a dark, mottled red. He raised his hand, his fingers curling into a fist. He wanted to strike her. Annalise did not even blink. She stood, rigid, waiting. "Corporal Evans!" The shout came from the doorway. Captain Miller, the camp commandant, stood there, his face like thunder. He was a stern, professional officer in his 40s, a man who believed in rules and regulations. He had clearly been making his rounds and had seen the entire exchange. Evans's hand froze in midair. He spun around, snapping to a clumsy semblance of attention. "Sir, just disciplining the prisoners, sir." Captain Miller's eyes were like chips of ice. He looked from Evans to the weeping Greta on the floor, to the ruined letter, and then to Annalise. Annalise still had not moved. Her gaze was locked on Evans, her contempt a palpable thing. "Disciplining them or tormenting them, Corporal?" Miller asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get back to your post. I will deal with this." "But, sir, she—" "Now, Corporal!" Miller barked. Evans shot Annalise a look of pure, undiluted hatred. It was a promise of retribution. He then turned and stalked out of the laundry. Miller watched him go before turning his attention to the women. "Get back to work." He looked at Greta, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You, Schmidt, go back to your barracks. Clean yourself up." He then looked at Annalise. He studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. She stood tall, her chin up, expecting to be punished. She had, after all, insulted a guard. "You," he said, pointing a finger at her. "Brandt, is it?" "Yes, Herr Kapitän," she replied. "You speak excellent English. I learned it in school, sir, and you are not afraid of my NCOs." "I am afraid of many things, sir," Annalise said honestly. "But I am not afraid of bullies." Miller's lips thinned. He seemed to be making a decision. "The laundry detail is a waste of your skills. Report to my office tomorrow morning, 0800. You will work in the administration building. You'll be translating and filing prisoner records." "It's better than this heat." Annalise was stunned. This was not the punishment she expected. "Sir, you heard me, Brandt. You'll be working for me under my direct supervision, and you will stay away from Corporal Evans. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir, perfectly." Dismissed. He turned and left. The women stared at Annalise. Ilsa was the first to speak, a note of grudging respect in her voice. "In the lion's den. Be careful, Annalise. That Miller is no friend, and you have made a snake like Evans your mortal enemy." "I know," Annalise said, her heart pounding. This was a dangerous, unexpected turn. She was being separated from her group. She was being promoted to a position of trust, which would only earn her the suspicion of the other prisoners and the focused hatred of the guards. But as she helped Greta to her feet, supporting the younger girl as she sobbed, Annalise felt a new, hard resolve. She was no longer just surviving. She was in a new kind of fight. Evans had tried to break their spirit over a piece of paper. He had no idea what he had started. That night, Annalise lay on her cot, listening to the lonely whistle of a distant train. She had been underestimated. She had been mocked as a washerwoman. Now she was going to work in the heart of the camp's administration. She was going to be inside the machine. And she remembered the look on Evans's face. This was far from over. There were thousands of them. She translated their intake forms, cross-referenced their military units, and updated their work detail assignments. It was meticulous, boring work, and she performed it with flawless precision. The other American clerks in the office, two young women in uniform named Private Harris and Corporal Davis, treated her with a wary, professional distance. They did not speak to her unless it was about the work. Annalise did not mind. The silence gave her time to think, to observe. Captain Miller was a hard, fair man. He ran his camp by the book. He demanded efficiency, and Annalise gave it to him. He would give her a stack of files in the morning, and she would have them processed, translated, and filed by the afternoon. After a week, he stopped checking her work so closely. He began to rely on her. This special treatment did not go unnoticed. Corporal Evans made it a point to pass through the office several times a day. He no longer had authority over her, but his presence was a constant, low-level threat. He would lean on the doorway, staring at her, that same sneering smile on his face. "Playing secretary, Brandt?" He'd call out loud enough for the whole office to hear. "Bet you're real good at taking notes." Private Harris would look down at her typewriter, her lips pursed in disapproval. Corporal Davis would giggle nervously. Annalise would not look up. She would simply continue her work, the click-clack of her own typewriter the only response. Her cold indifference was, she knew, the one weapon she had against him. It drove him mad, but Evans's resentment was only one part of her new reality. The other was the sheer staggering scale of the American operation. Working in the office, Annalise saw the supply manifests, the requisitions, the shipping ledgers. She saw the numbers for food, tons of beef, mountains of potatoes, rivers of milk. She saw the manifests for fuel, for clothing, for medical supplies. And she saw the comforts, Thousands of cartons of cigarettes, cases of chocolate, endless tins of coffee. She remembered the breakfast. This was the engine behind it. An unceasing, overwhelming flood of things. It made her previous feelings of hopelessness seem small. This was not just a military. It was an industrial giant. One rainy afternoon, Captain Miller was called away to a meeting in the nearby town. He left Annalise with a large stack of supply requisitions to file. "Just log them, Brant," he said. "Put them in the main ledger." She began the task, her movements mechanical. Requisition for the motor pool, gasoline, oil filters. Requisition for the mess hall, flour, sugar, and bacon, 50 crates. She paused. 50 crates. It was an astonishing amount. She entered the number. She continued. Requisition for prisoner comforts, Compound B, the large male camp. 800 cartons of cigarettes, 500 bars of chocolate. She logged it. Then she came to a smaller requisition. Prisoner comforts, Compound F. Compound F was their barracks. The female compound. The form requested 20 cartons of cigarettes, 50 bars of chocolate, and 10 pounds of coffee. It was signed off by Corporal Evans, who managed the supply allotments for the prisoner compounds. Annalise frowned. They had never received any of these things. Not once. She, Ilsa, Greta, none of them. She looked at the date. It was from last week. A cold, curious feeling settled in her. She pulled the file for the previous month. There it was again. A requisition for Compound F, cigarettes, chocolate, coffee, also signed by Evans. And the month before that. For 3 months, Evans had been signing for supplies for the female prisoners, and those supplies had vanished. It was not a large amount, not compared to the tons of beef or crates of bacon. It was a small, petty theft, but then she looked closer. She went back to the mess hall requisitions. She saw the daily orders, and she saw separate, smaller orders. 10 pounds of bacon here, 20 pounds of sugar there, 5 pounds of premium coffee, all signed by Evans, all marked for special detachment rations. There was no special detachment. Annalise's blood ran cold. This was not just petty theft from the women. Evans was running a business. He was stealing from the camp. The cigarettes, the coffee, the chocolate, and the bacon, that most American of symbols. He was stealing it all, and she assumed selling it on the black market in the local town. He wasn't just a bully. He was a common thief. He was the disgrace to the uniform, she had called him. She sat back, her mind racing. What could she do? She was a prisoner, a German. Who would believe her accusation against an American NCO? If she went to Miller, it would be her word against Evans's. Evans would say she was a bitter, lying kraut. He would say she fabricated it out of revenge, and if Miller didn't believe her, Evans would destroy her. He would have her sent from this camp, which was harsh but predictable, to somewhere far worse. He would find a way to hurt Ilsa and Greta. The risk was enormous. She thought of Greta crying over the ruined letter. She thought of Evans's sneering face as he dropped it in the mud. This was the same man, a man who stole from his own army and tormented those who were defenseless. Her sense of duty, her rigid, unwavering moral code was deeply, profoundly offended. This was not about Germany versus America. This was about right versus wrong. She could not let it go, but she needed more than a few suspicious forms. She needed proof. Irrefutable proof. She was in the perfect position to get it. But she had to be careful. Evans was lazy and arrogant, but he was not stupid. And he hated her. She formed a plan. She could not steal the ledgers, but she could copy them. The next day, she came to work with a new focus. She worked faster than usual, clearing her assigned desk work by lunch. In the afternoon, while the office was sleepy and Private Harris was occupied with a new shipment of mail, Annalise went to the main file cabinets. She pulled the supply manifests for the past 6 months. She also pulled the gate logs, the records of every vehicle that entered or left the camp. She rolled a fresh piece of paper, backed by a sheet of carbon paper, into her typewriter. Her hands were perfectly steady. She began to type. She was not just copying, she was cross-referencing. Date, March 10th. Requisition, CPL. Evans, 20 carton cigarettes, 10 lbs coffee. Signed out 14:30, gate log March 10th. No supply truck for Compound F, no entry. Date, March 24th. Requisition, CPL. Evans, 50 lbs sugar, 10 lbs bacon. Signed out, 15 sa. Gate log, March 24th, CPL. Evans, personal Jeep, departed main gate, 1510. Destination, town. One after another, she found them. A dozen different dates, a clear, undeniable pattern. Supplies were signed out by Evans, but never delivered to a compound. Instead, moments later, Evans himself would leave the camp. She was so focused, she did not hear the footsteps. "Working hard, Brant?" Annalise's heart leapt into her throat. She froze. It was Evans. He was standing right behind her, looming over her shoulder. She had been caught. She could feel his breath on her neck. He was reading what she had typed. She willed her hands not to tremble. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its mocking tone, replaced by a low, suspicious growl. "Looks like you're just copying the ledgers. Captain Miller asked you to do that?" Annalise took a slow, deep breath. She had to think. To lie would be to admit guilt. She had to use the truth, but in a way that protected her. She turned her head slowly to look at him. Her face was a mask of cool, professional indifference. "There was an ink spill, Corporal," she said, her voice calm. She pointed to a tiny, deliberate ink smudge she had made on the original ledger page an hour before. "I am retyping the page for the permanent file. Captain Miller insists on clean records." Evans stared at the ink smudge. He looked at her face, searching for a sign of a lie, of fear. He saw nothing but the same cold, dismissive prisoner who had worked here for weeks. His eyes narrowed. He was not convinced. An ink spill, right. He leaned down, his face close to hers. "You think you're smart, don't you? Playing the good little helper. But I know what you are. You're just a Nazi playing games. You keep your nose out of things that don't concern you, or you'll find yourself back in the laundry. Or worse." Annalise met his gaze. "I am just doing my job, Corporal. The job the Capitan assigned me. Are you ordering me to stop?" This was a direct challenge. To order her to stop would be to admit he had something to hide. He was caught in her trap. Evans stared at her for a long, venomous moment. Finally, he straightened up with a snarl. "Just finish it." He turned and stalked out of the office. Annalise's entire body began to shake. Her hands trembled so badly she had to grip the desk. She had won the encounter, but she knew she had just declared war. He knew she was onto him. She had no time left. She waited until she heard his Jeep start and drive away. She quickly pulled the paper and the carbon copy from the typewriter. She folded the carbon copy, her proof, into a small, tight square and slipped it inside the waistband of her dress. She replaced the original, damaged page with her new, clean copy. She filed everything. She had her evidence. When she returned to the barracks that evening, Ilsa looked at her pale face. "You look like you have seen a ghost, Annalise." Annalise sat on her cot, the small folded paper pressing against her skin. "No," she said, her voice quiet. "I have seen a thief, and now I must see a captain." She arrived at the office at 0750, 10 minutes early. Private Harris and Corporal Davis were already there, sipping coffee. Captain Miller's office door was closed. Annalise went to her desk, her movements calm and deliberate. She did not look toward the file cabinets. She simply began her assigned work for the day. At 8:30, Corporal Evans made his first pass. He didn't enter the office, just stood in the doorway, staring at her. Annalise did not acknowledge him. She kept her eyes on her work. After a full minute, he moved on. She waited. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. 0900, 0930. At 0945, Captain Miller emerged from his office, hat in hand. "Private Harris, I'm heading to Compound B for inspection. I'll be back after 1100. "Yes, sir," Harris replied. This was her chance. Evans would know Miller was gone. He might get careless, but Annalise could not wait for Miller to return. She had to act before Evans could. As soon as Miller's Jeep pulled away, Annalise stood up. "Private Harris," she said. The young American woman looked up, surprised. Annalise rarely initiated conversation. "I need to go to the infirmary. I am not feeling well." This was a risk. Harris could deny her or insist on an escort. But Annalise's face was pale, genuinely pale with fear, and she had been a model prisoner. Harris frowned, concerned. "Oh, all right, Brant." Don't be long." "Thank you." Annalise walked out of the administration building. She did not go toward the infirmary. She turned and walked, quickly but not running, back toward the main gate, toward Captain Miller's office. She was counting on the fact that no one would question a prisoner walking into the commandant's building. She slipped back inside, unseen. Harris and Davis were in the outer office, their backs to her, already busy. She walked straight to Captain Miller's private office door, and without knocking, let herself in. His office was sparse and clean, just like the man. A desk, 2 chairs, and a large map of the camp. She had no time. She walked behind his desk. She took the folded carbon copy from her waistband and opened it. It was her list of dates, times, and stolen goods. She placed the paper directly in the center of his green desk blotter, where he could not possibly miss it. She then slipped back out of the office, closing the door silently. "Feeling better?" Private Harris asked as Annalise walked past her desk. Annalise simply nodded and sat back down at her own typewriter. She had done it. Now all she could do was wait. The next hour was the longest of her life. Every sound made her jump. At 11:10, she heard Captain Miller's boots in the hallway. He entered the main office, nodded to his clerks, and went into his private office, closing the door. Annalise held her breath. The building was silent. 5 minutes passed. 10. The door to Miller's office opened. He stood in the doorway, the carbon copy in his hand. His face was unreadable. "Brant," he said. His voice was flat. "In my office now." Private Harris and Corporal Davis stared wide-eyed. Annalise stood up, her legs feeling like wood, and walked into his office. He closed the door behind her. He did not sit down. He stood looking at the paper. "Explain this." "It is a list of discrepancies, Herr Capitan," Annalise said, her voice steady. "I found them while filing the requisitions, as you ordered. I noticed supplies were signed for Compound F that my barracks never received. I investigated further." Miller looked up at her. His eyes were cold and hard. "You investigated. A prisoner of war. You went through my files. You spied on my NCO. I cross-referenced the ledgers, sir. The pattern is clear. Supplies are taken and Corporal Evans immediately leaves the camp. The items he takes, they are the same items he has denied my barracks." "This is a very serious accusation, Brant," Miller said. "It's your word. A German Flakhelferin against a non-commissioned officer of the United States Army. Why should I believe you?" "Because it is the truth," Annalise said simply. "And because you are a man who believes in rules. Those are your ledgers. Those are your gate logs. You can check them yourself." Miller stared at her, his expression grim. He was angry. Not at her, she realized, but at the situation, at the stain on his command. He knew she was telling the truth. "You put me in an impossible position," he said. "I put the truth on your desk, sir," Annalise replied. "What you do with it is your decision." A hard knock echoed on the office door, making them both turn. The door opened and Corporal Evans stuck his head in, a cocky smile on his face. "Excuse me, Captain, but Private Harris said you wanted to see—" "Oh." He saw Annalise. His smile faltered, turning into a sneer. "What's this? The little spy running to tell on me?" He looked at Miller. "Sir, I caught this Fräulein copying files yesterday. She's a spy, I tell you. She—" "Shut your mouth, Corporal," Miller said, his voice a low growl. He stepped from behind his desk. "I'm glad you're here. I was just reviewing some discrepancies." He held up Annalise's paper. Evans's eyes widened. All the color drained from his face. That's nothing," Evans stammered. "That's lies. She faked that. You can't believe this. This kraut over me. Are these your requisitions?" Miller asked, picking up a file from his desk. "Is this your signature? 10 pounds bacon, 20 cartons, cigarettes. Signed out by you?" For the prisoners, sir. Like it says." "Then why?" Miller said, his voice dropping. "Did my spy here and her entire barracks never see a single cigarette? And why," he continued, "did my friend, the sheriff in town, call me this morning to tell me he'd arrested 2 men for selling army-grade bacon and cigarettes at the local diner? And why did they say you were their supplier?" Evans's face crumpled. The arrogance, the bullying, it all melted away, replaced by the slack-jawed panic of a cornered rat. "They're lying! She set me up!" And here came the twist. No, Corporal, Miller said, his voice laced with contempt. She just confirmed what I already knew. I've had my eye on you for a month, Evans. Your little black market operation wasn't as clever as you thought. I was just waiting for the last piece. The ledgers. He looked at Annalise. I underestimated you, Brandt. I thought you were just an efficient clerk. I didn't realize you were an investigator. He then looked back at Evans. You are a disgrace. You steal from this army, and you torment prisoners under my protection. You are the coward she said you were. He picked up his phone. Get me the MPs. I want Corporal Evans in irons, now. Evans let out a strange, choked sound. He looked at Annalise with pure murderous hatred. You bitch! He lunged at her. Annalise didn't even flinch. Miller, despite his age, moved faster. He blocked Evans's path and struck him once, a hard, fast punch to the jaw. Evans staggered back, falling into a chair, holding his face. 2 MPs arrived moments later. They hauled the stunned, blubbering Evans to his feet. Get him out of my sight, Miller ordered. As they dragged him away, Evans was still shouting. You'll pay for this, you Nazi whore! You'll pay! Annalise stood, perfectly still, as the shouting faded down the hall. She was shaking, but she held it inside. Miller straightened his tunic. He looked at Annalise. The office was silent. You took an enormous risk, Brandt, he said. He dropped Greta's letter in the mud, Annalise replied, as if that explained everything. Miller nodded, understanding. Return to your barracks. Your work in this office is finished. It is no longer safe for you here. Yes, sir. She turned to leave. Brandt. She paused at the door. You did a good thing. You are a woman of honor. Annalise nodded once. Thank you, sir. She walked back to Compound F. The news of Evans's arrest spread through the camp like wildfire. When she entered the barracks, Ilsa and Greta rushed to her. What happened? They took Evans! In handcuffs! He was a thief, Annalise said simply, sitting on her cot. And he was caught. Ilsa stared at her, a slow smile spreading across her face. You did this. Annalise merely looked at her hands, which were finally steady. The months passed. The work in the laundry was hard, but Evans was gone. The new guards treated the women with a new, strange respect. They were no longer Hitler's girlfriends. They were Brandt's women. In May, the war in Europe ended. The news was met with a strange, quiet mix of relief and dread. They were survivors, but they had no idea what they were surviving for. What was left of their homes? Finally, the day came for them to leave. They were processed out, given new civilian clothes, simple dresses but clean. They were lined up, waiting for the trucks that would take them to a ship. Annalise stood, staring at the Texas sky one last time. She saw Captain Miller walking toward her. He stopped in front of her, the same stern, professional officer. He looked at her and she looked back. They were no longer prisoner and commandant. They were just 2 soldiers on opposite sides of a war that was finally over. Miller did not smile, but he raised his hand to his cap and gave her a full, crisp regulation salute. Frau Brandt, he said, his voice respectful. Good luck. Annalise was stunned. But her military training, her iron discipline, took over. She drew herself up, and though she had no uniform and no rank, she gave him a sharp, respectful nod. She turned and climbed into the back of the truck with the other women. As it rumbled to life, she looked back at the camp. The gates, the fences, the tar paper barracks, and from the distant mess hall she could smell the faint, smoky aroma of bacon. But it was no longer a symbol of power or waste or despair. It was just a smell. It was just breakfast. And she, Annalise Brandt, was finally truly going home.